Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Investment Trends, where we discuss the latest news in the stock market and the economy. And for this week, we decided to have a special segment since we will be celebrating this weekend the 250-year anniversary of our nation's independence. So what John and I decided to do today is give a quick look back at what has led the United States to be such the economical and the industrial powerhouse that it is today. Obviously, there were certain time frames and some of history's greatest entrepreneurs that led to a lot of this industrial boom that we saw. And so what we'll do today, give a quick timeline of some of the major impacts and innovations that we have seen throughout our nation's history.
Yeah, so leading up to America's independence, we were really an agrarian society. Growth was flat pretty much indefinitely. And then right around that time of the founding, the steam engine gets developed. And that kind of, on modern terms, it's not a huge jump, but basically went from 0 to 1% GDP growth with that innovation of the steam engine. It was really the impetus for all of the further developments that we see. And that's kind of, can be viewed as the first industrial revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from there, we start to see some familiar names in history as we get into, electricity, heavy industry, start to see some of the founders like Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, as we start to enter that next phase.
Yeah, so with Carnegie, you start looking at mass production of steel, being able to industrialize more widely at a cheaper price. Yeah, when Ford kind of harnessed that electricity and heavy industry together into the modern assembly line with the Model T, that process is still taught today in U.S. colleges. It really took operations and supply chain to the next level. And that took that 1% GDP growth to 1.5% to 2% per annum.
Yep, absolutely. So that's where we start to see, mass production, a lot of people employed. If we think about, Henry Ford during that time period, even before him or right around that time, we had, John D. Rockefeller as well. Then we get into sort of the, computerization. We start to see something, the internet and what this might start to look at. And that's really when the United States took another giant leap forward.
Yeah, looking at computers and the internet, really the third industrial revolution, taking everything online instead of moving huge, machines or moving big chunks of metal around. We're moving information at essentially no cost every day. That allows for, better international trade, better communication within companies, moving into e-commerce, the advertising engine that's been driven through social media. That was a really big step, looking at 3 to 4% annual GDP growth there.
Yep. Yeah, definitely made things, more efficient, quicker, easier to move. Some of the huge names during that time period are obviously Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. We saw, other companies, AOL, Yahoo. We kind of had that .com bubble that we saw around that time period. But definitely, like you mentioned, a ton of growth in the stock market throughout that time period. And now, if we look at kind of fast forward to current times, right? And we start to see, artificial intelligence, the what they're deeming as kind of the intelligent era. So if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of where that led to, kind of where we're at today.
Yeah. Starting mid-2010s, we really see that fourth industrial revolution with AI. And I would say the spearhead on this is Jensen Huang at NVIDIA. When they pivoted from being, kind of strictly a video games graphic producer, and realized those chips could be used for the exact types of computations that are needed for advanced AI, they really pushed everything forward on this side. You'd heard about AI for quite some time, but it was always kind of an abstract idea.
Yep.
we now see that pushing everything forward. It's still unknown what that GDP growth will look like, but I think that goes to show we're still in the early days of this fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that's been talked about, the past few years now. You mentioned that, taking some shape in 2010, and then really it took us all the way until about 2023 with the introduction of ChatGPT and OpenAI for people to tangibly start to see some of the productivity of artificial intelligence. Obviously during these time frames, some of the big names, Jeff Bezos with what he's been able to do with Amazon and how that has changed our everyday living. You mentioned Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, and then obviously as of late we have the world's richest man, which is now Elon Musk, and what he's been able to do with battery operated vehicles, with his rockets, that reusable rockets, and now he's getting into that phase of with Starlink and robotics, and where that could then lead us to. So, like you mentioned, with each one of these industrial revolutions, we did see pretty significant growth, and a lot of people are anticipating this most recent one with AI could be yet another solid boom and step forward for the U.S. We've certainly seen that in the stock market with approaching new record highs on a pretty consistent basis over these past 2 years. So something that we could still be in a bit of the early phases for as people figure it out. But the exciting part for me is these have happened. These types of revolutions and innovations have continued to happen all throughout history. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So we've seen similar instances of this in the past, and that's what can give people some sort of calmness to them that these types of innovations are normal for what we have seen throughout our 250 years that we've seen in the United States.
Yeah, and I think you look at each of those changes over the past, you see labor markets that change with that. With the advent of AI, I don't think that things are going to look the same in a few years.
Yep.
But I do think the market adjusts. It's a big scare right now, but people will find ways to fill those voids, and that's what keeps driving that further innovation down the line.
I completely agree. I think companies will adapt, but also so will employees, so will people entering the workforce, so will people in the workforce. We'll get smarter. We'll figure out ways to use these tools to our advantage to become more productive and continue to make our companies here in the United States more and more profitable and drive that farther earnings growth. So capitalism seems to be undefeated with our economy and the things that the U.S. has been able to accomplish in a short 250 years that has led to the U.S. being the strongest world economy. So that's what we've got. We did a quick look back at what we've seen so far in these 250 years of the U.S. Who's to say what the next 250 years looks like? But from where we sit today and where the stock market and the economy is going, we feel pretty strongly that we're headed in the right direction. The content of this video is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing presented here constitutes investment advice, a securities recommendation, or solicitation to buy or sell any financial instrument. The views expressed are our own as of the date of this recording and are subject to change without notice. As financial professionals, we may hold or manage client accounts that hold positions in the securities and companies discussed in this video. Those positions can change at any time. All data and information referenced is sourced from publicly available materials believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed, and past performance is not indicative of future results. All investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. This content does not account for your individual investment objectives, financial circumstances, or risk tolerance. We encourage you to conduct your own due diligence and consult with a qualified financial, legal, or tax professional before making any investment decisions.